What was meant to be a royal celebration turned into a moment that froze the nation. Gasps echoed through the gilded hall as Prince George, third in line to the throne, broke centuries of silence and formality. What he said to Camilla stunned the entire assembly. But this wasn't just a moment, it was the eruption of years of royal resentment, buried grief, and a boy haunted by a mother he never met. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began like any other opulent royal gathering. The palace had pulled every string for the occasion, a night to showcase unity, modernity, and the golden lineage of Britain's monarchy. Jewel-toned gowns shimmered under the chandelier's light, dignitaries mingled over champagne, and a hush of reverence blanketed the historic hall. Every major royal was in attendance. At the head of it all, King Charles stood beside Queen Camilla, who was soon to address the gathering in what was billed as a visionary speech for a new royal age. But there was one face in the crowd that carried a storm behind young eyes: Prince George. He sat composed, poised like the heir he was raised to be, yet something simmered behind his steady gaze. Those close enough noticed his fingers twitch against the cuff of his jacket, a quiet battle between restraint and rage. Moments later, Camilla stepped up to the podium. Her speech, full of polished grace and regal authority, praised the monarchy's evolution and its commitment to honoring tradition while embracing the future. To the average ear, her words were harmless, even commendable. But to George, they struck like a veiled insult. When she alluded to past struggles that refined the institution's strength, the air around him tightened. He rose, without cue, without permission. Gasps sliced through the stillness like blades. All eyes turned to the young prince, 15 years old, yet suddenly the most powerful voice in the room. He didn't hesitate. His voice rang out, clear and sharp, cutting through the silence with royal steel and the rawness of a grandson aching for truth. "She was never a mistake," he said, locking eyes with Camilla. "She was my grandmother, and she changed this family more than you ever will." The room froze. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like distant thunder. Queen Camilla's expression faltered, her grip on the lectern tightening ever so slightly. The cameras weren't rolling, but the world didn't need video. Within minutes, the confrontation was leaked. Headlines ignited across the globe. Prince George confronts Camilla over Diana, a monarchy shaken. Social media erupted, splitting in waves of sympathy, disbelief, and awe. Some called him reckless, others a revolutionary. But no one could ignore him anymore. George had shattered the royal silence. And what made it more powerful wasn't just what he said, but the centuries of grief, guilt, and unspoken blame that lay beneath every word. But to understand why George risked everything, we must go back to the whispers behind palace walls and the legacy of a ghost that never stopped haunting the crown. They tried to bury her story, her influence, even her image, but Diana never left. She became a symbol, an echo, a myth too powerful for time to silence. And though George was born years after her death, her presence shaped his destiny from the moment he took his first breath. Diana wasn't just mourned, she was immortalized. Her smile, her rebellion, her vulnerability, they didn't fade with the headlines. Instead, they rooted themselves deep within the public memory, haunting the very institution that once cast her out. And no matter how polished the royal machinery became, it could never fully erase the cracks she left behind. The world called her the people's princess, but within the walls of the palace she remained something else entirely, an unresolved wound. For William, the grief never truly passed. He carried it like a shadow, silent yet ever present, tucked between the royal obligations and the smiles for cameras. He honored her in ways the public never saw, through quiet charities, in subtle gestures, and the fierce protectiveness he had over his children. Diana's memory was not celebrated in official speeches or grand portraits. It was guarded deliberately, because inside the firm her name still made the air shift, and into this silence was born George. From the beginning, he was wrapped in a story not his own. His mother told him who his grandmother was, his father too, when the moment was right. But nothing could prepare him for the storm of emotion he'd feel when he first saw footage of Diana, glowing with life, greeting the public like a queen in everything but title. For George, she became larger than life, Not a figure of the past, but a legacy denied. He began asking questions, painful ones. Why was she never queen? Why was her name missing from family tributes? Why did some in the family act like she never existed? There were no satisfying answers, only discomfort. And that discomfort grew louder when George began speaking about her at royal events, sometimes in front of those who had once opposed her presence. Camilla, especially, found herself at the center of these tensions. Though the palace had tried to recast her image, rehabilitate it, soften it, it never truly worked in George's mind. To him, Diana wasn't just a ghost. She was a wrong that had never been made right. Every time her image was excluded from ceremonial references or charitable retrospectives, he took it personally. And the more his voice grew, the more the institution tried to dampen it with the weight of tradition. He once asked why Diana's portrait wasn't in the Royal Gallery at Balmoral. The silence that followed was louder than any answer. Charlotte remembered that day well, how George's eyes narrowed, not with childish frustration, but with something deeper, a dawning understanding that the crown didn't merely forget Diana, it chose to. Behind closed doors, his insistence became a quiet rebellion. In public, he remained the dutiful prince. But inside, he was plotting something far more powerful than protocol. He was preparing to reclaim the legacy that had been ghosted from royal memory. But what truly ignited George's rebellion wasn't just emotion. It was a private betrayal that made him question everything. Tucked inside an ornate writing desk at Balmoral was a sealed envelope. It bore Diana's handwriting and was addressed simply, "To my sons." But it wasn't George who found it. It was Charlotte, and what they uncovered together changed everything. It began innocently, as these things often do. A rainy afternoon, two royal siblings wandering the halls of Balmoral, seeking distraction from the rigidity of family traditions. The estate, vast and heavy with generational memory, seemed to whisper secrets in every corridor. In a rarely used study, filled with antique furniture and forgotten heirlooms, Charlotte opened the drawer of a carved desk once belonging to Queen Victoria. Inside, among faded papers and cracked leather bindings, she spotted an envelope. Its edges were yellowed, the ink faded, but the handwriting was unmistakably familiar, etched into the royal consciousness. She didn't understand its weight, not yet. She handed it to George, thinking little of it. But the moment he saw the words, his breath caught. He opened it without hesitation. And as he read, the world around him fell away. It wasn't a formal letter. It was raw, trembling with emotion. The kind of letter only a mother facing shadows would write. Diana spoke of love, of hope, of the agony of being silenced. She wrote to her sons about holding on to kindness, but never mistaking silence for peace. There were cryptic lines, careful phrasing, warnings cloaked in maternal tenderness. She spoke of being watched, of betrayal of someone close she no longer trusted. She didn't name names, but the fear bled through the page. It wasn't paranoia, it was prophecy. And for George, it shattered everything he thought he understood about his family's past. He didn't tell anyone, not right away. He kept the letter hidden in his room, rereading it each night until he could recite the words by heart. They became a private anthem, a painful lullaby that stirred questions no one wanted to answer. Why had this letter been buried? Why had no one told him it existed? And most damning of all, why did it feel like the monarchy had buried more than just a mother's memory? The change in him was swift. He grew quiet, withdrawn, distrustful. He began to see royal history not as a proud lineage, but as a carefully edited narrative. He asked pointed questions during family gatherings, only to be met with deflection. Charlotte noticed the shift. She asked him if he was angry. He said no, he was awake. Diana's words had pierced the veil of loyalty, and now every smile from senior royals felt rehearsed. Every sanitized story about the past rang hollow. And then came the moment of no return. George, unable to hold back, brought up the letter during a private lunch with his father. He expected reassurance. He expected grief. Instead, William froze. He said nothing, no denial, no explanation, just silence. a silence so heavy it confirmed the very warnings Diana had written down decades earlier. It was then that George understood truth in this family was currency, and some truths were simply too dangerous to spend. But when George tried to confront his father about the letter, he was met not with comfort but with silence that spoke volumes. William looked away. The future king who had fought to shield his mother's memory suddenly became the quiet enforcer of royal protocol. But it was Camilla's reaction that pierced George's soul, a knowing smile, a shrug of indifference. It was the moment he decided, no more silence. George had expected resistance, but not from his father. Not from the man who had once clung to Diana's legacy with the same fire that now burned inside him. The confrontation was quiet, private, and unplanned. George brought up the letter with the calm precision of someone holding undeniable truth. He spoke of Diana not as a fabled princess, but as a woman silenced, erased, diminished over time by those who benefited from her absence. He asked why her name was never spoken at public events, why there was no statue in the gardens of Balmoral, why the monarchy remembered her only in whispers, and why those whispers always stopped when Camilla entered the room. But William didn't rise to the bait. He didn't offer comfort or outrage. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, eyes clouded with burden, and said only this: "There are things we preserve not for ourselves, but for the institution. And not everything that is true is useful." The words stunned George more than any denial, because in that moment, he realized what Diana had feared. The institution always came first, even from her own son. George left the room without another word, a hollow echo trailing behind him, one that would harden into defiance. Days later, that defiance turned into fury when he overheard what Camilla had said behind closed doors to a group of aides. Diana was an emotional myth. Revered, yes, but not realistic. The words were careless, cold, and calculated. She didn't say it with malice, but with ease. As if Diana's pain had always been a kind of performance. As if history had exaggerated her impact. As if the world had simply indulged a tragic figure and moved on. To George, it was more than a slight. It was a violation. It was the final push. His identity, already intertwined with the idea of Diana, now felt under attack, and more painfully it seemed his own family, the very people who should have protected that legacy, had made peace with its erasure. Charlotte noticed the shift in her brother's demeanor. She warned him not to do anything impulsive, reminded him that they were still just teenagers inside a centuries-old machine. Even a trusted royal aide, loyal to William but quietly fond of George, suggested caution. "There's timing in everything," he said. "You speak too early, and they'll turn you into a footnote." But George wasn't interested in timing anymore. He was done playing the long game. There comes a point when grief morphs into rage, and when a grandson feels he's the last voice left to speak for a woman whose truth was swallowed by tradition, that rage becomes unstoppable. He stopped asking for permission. He stopped looking for allies. His eyes were now set on a reckoning, and deep down he knew it would come at a cost. But silence, he had decided, was the greater betrayal. But the stage was already set, and fate would deliver the perfect storm for George's reckoning. It was billed as a tribute to unity, to modernization, to moving forward. But behind the smiles and champagne, the atmosphere crackled with secrets. George walked into the hall knowing exactly what he would do. He wasn't just attending a gala, he was walking into battle. The invitation read like a celebration: 70 years of royal reinvention, a night to honor the monarchy's transformation, its adaptation in a changing world. Beneath the gold and grandeur, the event was meant to be a masterstroke of public relations, a narrative of harmony, crafted to repair the fractures of the past. But for George, those fractures weren't just history. They were wounds, still fresh, still bleeding. And tonight, as the monarchy raised its glass to progress, he would no longer be silent. Camilla was set to speak. Everyone knew it, her name printed boldly. In the program, her position as Queen Consort now cemented in royal tradition. And George had read that program a dozen times, memorizing the order of events like a general preparing for war. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. He wasn't nervous. He was resolute. Every step he took into the marble hall carried a single, searing purpose: to reclaim the legacy of the woman whose face had been wiped from the royal mosaic. Diana. He chose his outfit deliberately, a sharp white suit, almost identical in tone to the gown Diana had worn during her famous dance with John Travolta. On his cuffs, sapphires, a direct echo of the engagement ring now worn by his mother. Symbols, quiet, powerful symbols. The same way his grandmother once communicated when her voice was stolen. These were his unspoken words before the storm. And still, no one noticed. Not even William, who caught his son's stare more than once that evening but said nothing. Perhaps he sensed it. Perhaps he knew and simply couldn't stop it. The room glowed with opulence and flattery. Political leaders, aristocrats, cultural icons, all present, all watching. Camilla stood to deliver her speech, her voice calm and practiced. She spoke of tradition's evolution, of the crown's ability to adapt. Her language was calculated, drenched in diplomacy, but George didn't flinch until she said it. We must embrace past errors with dignity and move forward together with wisdom and grace. The words designed to soothe sliced through him like a blade. Past errors, embrace, dignity. It was the polished dismissal of a life that had been anything but dignified in its ending. Diana's story wasn't an error to be folded into a footnote. It was a warning, a reckoning. And as the audience nodded politely and clinked their glasses, George's eyes narrowed with the certainty of someone who had nothing left to lose. He had watched, his family hide behind rehearsed history for years. Now the moment had arrived to break the script, and for the first time in decades, the monarchy would lose control of the narrative. And then, with the eyes of the world upon him, the unthinkable happened. No one expected the boy prince to speak. No one imagined he would rise, voice trembling but defiant, and address the queen consort as if the monarchy itself was on trial. His words, "She was my grandmother too," cut through the room like a blade. It happened so suddenly that for a few seconds no one moved. Camilla was still mid-sentence, her voice smooth and practiced, barely touching the surface of the carefully curated past. She didn't see it coming. No one did. But then came George's voice, clear and unwavering, echoing through a room built on silence. "She was my grandmother too," he said again, this time louder, with steel beneath the sorrow. Heads turned, guests froze. The orchestra stopped mid-note. Time itself seemed to fracture, as the youngest future king stood in judgment of the crown that made him. Camilla hesitated, visibly caught off guard. She looked at George as one might look at an unpredictable force royal by blood, yet dangerous in defiance. But George wasn't finished. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't apologize for breaking protocol. Instead, he did what no royal had dared to do in public since Diana herself. He told the truth, unfiltered and burning. "You speak of evolution," he said, his gaze locked on Camilla. "But you erased her. You erased my grandmother from this family's story like she was an inconvenience. You speak of unity while pretending she never existed." Gasps swept through the audience like a wave crashing against tradition. A few guests looked down in discomfort. Others stared at the young prince with a mix of awe and disbelief. Among the royal family, the tension cracked like glass under pressure. William remained frozen, caught between the father he had become and the son he had once been. Kate's expression flickered between shock and pride, but she said nothing, allowing her son to carry the storm he had summoned. George's voice, though steady, betrayed the years of pain that had gone unspoken. "You use her name only when it's convenient," he continued. "When it earns sympathy, when it makes the crown look softer, more human. But she was more than that. She was real, and she deserved better than to be reduced to a silent sacrifice for this institution." Camilla opened her mouth, perhaps to respond, perhaps to defend herself, but George didn't stop. "I've seen the letters. I know what she feared, and now I know why." His words, once a son's sorrow, now felt like a young man's indictment. The court of public opinion would soon replay them endlessly, but in that moment, they were aimed only at the woman who had taken the title Diana was denied. The room remained silent as George returned to his seat. The weight of his words hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one dared to extinguish. He didn't look at anyone. Not at his father, not at the cameras, not even at Camilla. Because the statement had been made and no royal script could undo it now. But the moment didn't end when George sat down, because what followed was a royal eruption the world had never seen. Palace aides scrambled. Phones lit up. Statements were drafted, then shredded. What started as a family rift exploded into a global spectacle. And behind palace doors, panic set in. Prince George had done what no royal ever dared, weaponized grief in front of the world. Despite strict security, despite the royal household's desperate attempts to contain it, footage of the confrontation leaked within hours. A grainy audio clip, captured from a hidden microphone meant for archival purpose, made its way into the hands of a tabloid, and then the internet did the rest. Social media ignited like wildfire. Clips circulated. Transcripts were debated. Every word George had spoken was replayed, dissected, quoted like scripture. She was my grandmother too. It became a rallying cry for a generation tired of scripted monarchy and silent wounds. Public fascination turned into public obsession, and within 48 hours, the confrontation had eclipsed every global headline. Inside the palace, chaos reigned. There was no unified response, just confusion, tension, and fractured loyalty. Senior aides were divided. Some pushed for swift condemnation, citing disrespect and damage to the crown's reputation. Others quietly, cautiously believed George had voiced a truth that had long needed air. Royal sources leaked contradictory accounts. Some painted George as an impulsive teenager overwhelmed by emotion. Others, more sympathetic, described him as brave, principled, and finally refusing to be silenced like the women before him. The House of Windsor, always polished on the surface, was cracking at the core. Charles, already fragile in his public approval, was reportedly incandescent. Furious not only at George, but at William and Kate for losing control of the narrative. For a king who had spent years reconstructing his image and stabilizing Camilla's role in the monarchy, this was more than a scandal, it was a public undoing. Camilla, for her part, withdrew immediately from upcoming appearances, cancelled engagements, retreated behind closed doors. Her silence spoke louder than any press release. And while the palace tried to spin it as a necessary rest, insiders knew better. She had been wounded not just by George's words, but by the applause that followed them, both literal and digital. William found himself at the center of a firestorm, torn between the institution he was raised to protect and the son he was supposed to guide. For the first time in his royal life, he was paralyzed. Publicly, he said nothing. Privately, he was battling two storms, one inside the palace and one inside his home. Kate stepped into the vacuum. Quietly, steadily, she shielded George from the worst of the fallout. She refused to let her son become a sacrificial lamb to royal tradition. While others scrambled for damage control, she stood beside him, neither encouraging nor correcting, simply protecting. And George? He refused to bend. He refused to recant. When his father confronted him, demanding an explanation, George didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I meant every word." That sentence, too, made its way to the press, another fire lit. Because while the crown had spent decades mastering the art of silence, George had introduced something it could not control: raw, unapologetic emotion in front of the world. But even as the palace tried to contain the damage, the public had already chosen a side, and a storm was building that would shake the throne itself. Across the world, people saw not a spoiled royal, but a brave boy standing up for a legacy erased. Flowers began appearing outside Kensington Palace again. Murals of Diana with George appeared overnight. For the first time in decades, a royal had touched the people's soul. The public reaction was immediate, emotional, and overwhelmingly in George's favor. Polls surged with support not seen since Diana's heyday. The British people, long fatigued by rehearsed interviews and polished statements, saw in George something rare, a royal who bled openly, who challenged the very institution. That raised him. In him, they saw not entitlement but truth, not scandal but justice. Social media lit up with videos of Diana's past interviews, photos of her with a young William, clips of her dancing, laughing, crying. Hashtags linked her memory to George's defiance. It wasn't nostalgia, it was resurrection. In contrast, Camilla's image took a crushing blow. Where George had stirred emotions, she now seemed stiff, distant, detached. Editorials described her as cold, and in some corners as the embodiment of everything the modern monarchy was supposed to have outgrown. The palace communications team worked overtime, issuing carefully worded statements, releasing select images, but nothing landed. Every PR move was met with resistance, because the tide had turned, and no amount of royal spin could erase what had been said in that hall, in front of the monarchy, in front of the world. And then came the phrase, "the people's heir." It started as a tweet, then a headline, then a movement. George, barely into his teens, had ignited something bigger than himself. Diana's supporters, once voiceless, once dismissed, were now louder than ever. Grassroots petitions began circulating, demanding her inclusion in future royal tributes, her legacy acknowledged not as a footnote, but as a foundational chapter in the story of the modern crown. The monarchy could no longer pretend she hadn't shaped it. Quietly, within the royal ranks, something else began to shift. Younger royals, those born into the aftermath of Diana's storm, watched George's rebellion not with judgment, but admiration. Some reached out privately. Some simply nodded in solidarity across palace corridors. The old guard may have seen a threat, but the new generation saw a spark. A call to redefine what royalty could mean, not just as duty, but as truth. But behind the scenes, one question lingered: what price would George pay? Why, for his rebellion? Some say he's a future king remaking the crown. Others whisper he's walking a dangerous path, one his grandmother once walked alone. Will George become the symbol of a new monarchy? Or will the firm do what it always does, silence dissent from within? Behind the public adoration and media frenzy, fault lines began to form deep within the palace. Royal insiders were split, whispering behind closed doors, unsure whether to crown George a visionary or label him a threat. Some believed he had injected long-lost humanity back into the monarchy, that his words had done what decades of PR could not make the institution feel real again. But others warned this wasn't bravery, it was betrayal. That every time he spoke Diana's name with reverence, he was pulling the curtain back on a carefully preserved illusion the monarchy depended on for survival. And at the center of that storm stood William, father to the boy who'd just shaken the very throne he would one day inherit. Sources close to the palace confirmed he was being pressured by senior advisors to contain the damage, to rein George in before he tears the fabric. The words were clinical, but the meaning was clear. George's defiance was no longer seen as emotional, it was political, the kind that could ripple through generations. William, once the quiet keeper of Diana's flame, now stood on a cliff edge, torn between the family he loved and the crown he was sworn to protect. Whispers soon emerged that George was writing something of his own, not just a diary, but a manuscript, a personal account, a chronicle of what Diana's story meant to him and what he believed the world needed to remember. The idea sent shockwaves through the corridors of the palace. A teenage prince crafting a narrative beyond the firm's control was uncharted territory, and with every passing day of silence between George and his grandfather, the tension turned icy. Charles, deeply wounded, reportedly refused to speak to him. There were weeks of total silence. Not a word, not a message, only distance. Speculation grew that George would be quietly sent abroad. Talk of an international school, far from the British press, for his own good, a way to cool the heat, reposition him under the watchful eye of handlers who could soften his fire. But those close to George knew it wasn't that simple anymore. He wasn't acting out, he was acting on purpose. Every decision, every word was measured. He knew what he had started, and he wasn't finished. In one of the most emotional moments whispered by a palace insider, George was seen visiting Diana's statue alone, long after the cameras had gone. He stood there, silent, hands in his pockets. Then, as he turned to leave, he whispered 7 simple words: "I hope I made you proud." Because in the House of Windsor, every act of truth comes with a price, and the next chapter is only just beginning. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.